Hey, my friend, I'm really excited to bring you this special episode of Anti Aging Hacks because I interviewed Dr. Greg Fahy, who's one of the leading scientists that's helping us defeat aging. And in particular, he led a study that reversed aging in humans by 2.5 years. So I'm really excited. This is the first scientist to ever do so to reverse aging in mammals and in humans. And his protocol is especially important in this day and age as we're fighting coronavirus, is because his protocol helps regenerate the thymus gland in your body, which sits right behind your breastbone. And the thymus gland is responsible for creating the T cells that have all the immunity fighting powers. So these give your body immunity to fight diseases and to fight viruses like the coronavirus. So stay tuned and let's get into the episode. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Greg Fahy, who's a very accomplished cryobiologist and a gerontologist. On top of that, he's the first scientist that has reversed aging in humans. Congratulations on a feat well done, sir.
Thank you, Faraz.
And welcome to the Anti-Aging Hack Show. I'm super excited to have you here. I know we've been trying to schedule this for a little while, but I'm glad.
Months and months, yes.
It's been a few months, but I'm glad we're here.
I am too.
So, Dr. Fahy, for the audience, I know your storied accomplishments, but the audience doesn't. So would you kind of talk about how you got into the medical profession and where you've been working in the decades since?
Right. So just one point of clarification. I am a doctor, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a PhD. So I study how doctors can develop new technologies that they can bring to patients rather than delivering those technologies myself. So we work with a physician in our trials. I design the protocols, and the doctor and I collaborate, make sure everything is going well for the patients. But I got interested in science at a young age, started studying molecular biology when I was in junior high school. I read my first book on aging when I was a senior in high school. I actually taught a course on aging at UC Irvine when I was an undergraduate.
They were talking about aging back then?
Not much, but I was. Actually, there were some interesting people doing interesting things and having interesting thoughts back in those days. And the orientation that I developed back at that time was that aging is very interesting. It's not just a matter of simple wear and tear like everybody thinks. That aging is more like the conversion of a tadpole into a frog. It's an orchestrated, biochemically driven a series of events. And it's been very hard to get very clear evidence in support of that idea for a long time. But now the evidence is increasing all the time. And it's becoming more and more apparent that that sort of thing is going on. Something like that is going on. So that led me to look for mechanisms that you could use to cause physiological changes. And one of the things that I hit upon was this amazing study. It was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is a very top-level journal, and then studiously ignored after that, which often happens. And this study showed something that I just thought was earth-shaking in its consequences, and that was that you could regrow the thymus of an old animal. So in order to explain that, so in your chest cavity here, between your breastbone and your heart, you have a gland. It's sort of looks like a blob of fat, more or less, but it's not. It's necessary for you to stay alive, and it's called your thymus gland, not to be confused with your thyroid gland, which is nearby, but not the same gland. So your thymus recruits cells from your bone marrow and changes them into immune system cells. Your immune system protects you from cancer and viruses and bacteria and any other nasty thing that might want to invade you and kill you. And unfortunately, the thymus, after doing a wonderful job at this until you're about 12 or so, then it starts to wither and go away. That's a process called thymic involution. It's obviously physiologically driven. It's clocked. It happens in all of us at about the same time. And this study in PNAS shows you can actually reverse that deterioration of the thymus and actually reverse immune system decline that through the aging process had gone down by 90%. And gone all the way back up to 100% of youthful immune function. And that was done by a simple intervention giving growth hormone to these old animals. Now, growth hormone has been looked at for a long time by a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and most people have missed the boat on growth hormone. It's not, it's not that great for bodybuilding, although that's really what a lot of people use it for, and that's illegal to use it for that purpose, according to the FDA. And it's not really legal at this time to use it to treat aging either, because the FDA has not had anybody come to them with a convincing demonstration that it's good for us when we get older. It does all kinds of stuff that are in opposition to aging, but all the measurements that you will find out in the literature will generally say that there's no big deal going on there. And so since there's always a hazard of any medication, the FDA just has not approved it for that use. So I'm hoping to change that, because our first trial, verified this study goes all the way back to 1986, that you can actually regrow the thymus using growth hormone. Now, there are certain problems with that. Growth hormone does have side effects. It can make you gain weight in terms of water. Your kidneys are retaining water. It can also cause your joints to try to grow again. And after you're finished growing up and you're now an adult, your joints can't grow. You're not going to get any taller. But growth hormone doesn't know that. It tries to grow your joints, so they feel a little bit painful sometimes. And so there are little things like that. But the most serious side effect of growth hormone is that it has this nasty pro-aging effect. It raises your blood levels of insulin. So insulin, we've all heard about, kids that have type 1 diabetes, their problem is they can't make insulin. And as we get older, we develop something called type 2 diabetes, in which we can make insulin, at least sort of, but it's not very effective anymore. So we've heard of insulin in the context of diabetes, but most of us have not heard of insulin in the context of growth hormone. So all these bodybuilders are out there pumping up on growth hormone and taking insulin at the same time. They're killing themselves. They should not do that. So this is why the FDA is not really sanguine about using growth hormone for these off-label uses. But what we have shown is that you can block this side effect of growth hormone. So this what they call the diabetogenic effect of growth hormone, this insulin elevation, which tends to cause age-related pathologies that negate the beneficial effects of growth hormone, that can be blocked by taking into account a very simple thing, which is that when we're old and we take growth hormone, we have this problem with insulin. But when we're young and we take growth hormone, when we're young and we naturally have lots of growth hormone coursing through our veins, we're fine. We don't have insulin elevation. So I asked myself the question, why is that? What is it different about having a lot of growth hormone at one age versus the other age? And one of the very obvious things that stood out to me was that as you go through puberty, your growth hormone levels begin to go down, and they go down quite a lot as you get older. But there's something else that's very prevalent, very high in abundance in youth, that goes down greatly with age, and that's this adrenal steroid hormone called DHEA, or dehydroepiandrosterone. And DHEA was there. It's present in very high concentrations compared to other steroid hormones, and nobody could come up with a use for it for
Except
a long
for
time.
bodybuilders, right?
Well, they use it for
Use it too,
bodybuilding,
yeah.
exactly. But why does that work? And so one reason that might work is that if you take a lot of it, it can be converted into testosterone, and testosterone may be what's really building up the muscles. But and by the way, if you take testosterone and growth hormone, your muscles do much better than if you just take the growth hormone or the testosterone by yourself.
So
Not that I'm advocating. Yes, exactly.
The synergistic effect is much better than either by themselves.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it kind of harkens back to the same idea that growth hormone plus DHEA might be better than growth hormone by itself, because in nature, in life, in your early life, they both coexist. And now, so to try to introduce one without introducing the other late in life is unnatural. And so I thought, could it be that the reason that we have high levels of DHEA in youth is specifically to block the diabetogenic effect of growth hormone, something nobody had thought of before.
Right.
So I tried it on myself. I did a simple experiment.
When was this?
Oh, this would have been circa 1995 or so.
It's 23 years, 24 years.
This takes a long time.
You've been thinking about this for a long time.
It takes a long time.
Oh, wow.
The paper came out that I'm referring to, PNAS, came out in 1986. I wrote an editorial in Mount Sinai Journal of Medicine about aging, urging people to pay attention to that 5 years later. Nobody did. So 5 years later, I was so frustrated I did experiments on myself because nobody else would take this seriously. And I regrew my own thymus. I was only 46 in those days, but
oh, wow.
So maybe it's a little easier, I don't know. But in any case, I was just on the growth hormone plus DHEA for a little over a month and had an MRI scan done before and after, and was able to show statistically, even though I was just one person, that my thymus had increased in mass and was now above the normal range for my age and closer to a youthful thymic mass.
Very well done, sir.
Well, thank you.
Very well done.
It's hard to do that when, that's not your main line of work, you
Right.
know, but, I had to do it because this was an unanswered question that if true, if this observation could be translated to people, it would have tremendous impacts on late life morbidity and mortality. Mm-hmm. For example, who dies of the flu? We all get the flu, but who dies of the flu? 90% of the people who die of the flu are over 65. Who dies of pneumonia? It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Most people die of pneumonia once they're so old that their immune systems are not working anymore.
And for example, it's very pertinent that you're talking about this because coronavirus is going on and the whole world is shutting down.
Absolutely.
But the majority of people that are dying are 60 or over.
Absolutely.
So you're 100% right.
Yeah. So this is, I hate to say it, but in a way it's good time to be working on the immune system, right?
Yes. Perfect timing.
Right, perfect timing. Because that's in the end, that's the only line of defense, because coronavirus is just one example of a general case. The general case is that new stuff comes along all the time, and you don't have a vaccine for everything. And actually, there are old things that sometimes mutate so they're no longer affected by the antibiotics. So you have things like MRSA, for example, which just kills people because all antibiotics have become useless against it. So for those reasons, and this coronavirus won't be the last virus that comes over here from China. Every couple of years, something new comes over here from China. So we try our best to keep up with it with vaccines. We need to do all of that. That's very important. We need to develop drugs to combat it, but those things have limited effectiveness if they're superimposed on a destroyed immune system.
Correct.
So unfortunately, because of thymic involution, your ability to recognize things that want to kill you declines by 98% between the ages of about 62 and 78.
Oh my goodness, how are you still standing?
Yeah, well...
You can't even detect a threat.
I know, exactly. You're defenseless, right?
So Dr. Fahy, just explain to the listeners, there's the bone marrow that produces these cells, the white blood cells. They migrate into the thymus, where they get trained to become, the 300, right? The soldiers that are gonna fight a new pathogen, if you will, that they've never seen before.
That's right.
So if the thymus isn't working, there's no ability for us to kind of form a line of defense against a new virus that you're just talking about, with coronavirus and others.
Exactly. So the immune system is sort of like a deck of cards in a sense. So there's only 52 cards in the deck, but you can rearrange them in so many different ways, right? So you have a limited number of genes, but you can rearrange little bits of your DNA to attack a tremendous number of foreign antigens. And so your immune system tends to generate new cells all the time to replace the old cells that are no longer around or no longer functional. And when that process slows down, then if you don't already have immunity against this new kid on the block that comes in, you're in trouble. Right. So,
and there's no way, because the thymus is what's doing this training to these cells.
Yes.
And if the thymus isn't working, then you can't train them.
Exactly.
Man, so coronavirus is just going to go, hey, let's party.
Exactly. And, the overall mortality rate for coronavirus is like 2%, maybe 3%. But if you're over 65 or you're over 80, the mortality rate is more like 20%.
Oof.
8 to 20%, depending upon what you read. So
That's amazing.
yeah,
It's a great time for you to be doing this. Now,
Yes.
I want to come back to a couple of things.
yes,
You did this in 1996 after
Yes.
a study on rats was done 10 years prior.
exactly 10 years prior.
So you did an N of 1.
Yes,
You figure out through MRI that you're
Yes.
able to increase the size of your thymus.
yes,
Feeling validated at that point,
yes.
what took you 20 years to come to this landmark study that now the whole world is noticing?
Is because I realized I couldn't do a study by myself. I
Okay.
had to have at least one other person on the planet who actually cared about this. I was busy cryopreserving organs.
Yes.
I didn't have, independent support for this, so I needed a partner. And finally, after meeting people on this bulletin board called the LAGRG, which is a discussion group for people who want to do something about aging, and also just about the biology of aging. Eventually, I met somebody who became interested in what I wanted to do, and we had a meeting here actually, and decided we were going to partner together and work on this. So we spent a lot of time brainstorming about what we could do, and I put together a trial plan, and we found another person on that same bulletin board who was willing to back the plan. And we actually did this, so I'd never done a clinical trial before. I'm not a doctor. I'm just the guy doing organ banking, right? So, but there are procedures that you can follow to get through the hurdles in the way of these things. And I'm a very thorough and careful person, so none of that was a problem for me. So we actually did the trial, and lo and behold, it worked.
Okay, so now let's talk about the specifics of the trial.
Yes.
How many men did participate in the trial? How long did it take? What is the mixture of compounds? And what is the result?
Yes. So we originally targeted 10 people, and we actually had signed up 10 people. We had one person drop out after about a month or so. He had a heart condition before the study that he felt was getting worse during the study, which probably is not study related, but he dropped out. So we ended up with 9 people in the study. They were all men by coincidence. They were all Caucasian by coincidence. We recruited most of them from the Bay Area. There's this wonderful forum that was being held in the Bay Area every Friday or every so often on Fridays by Joe Betts-LaCroix. And so I was invited to talk at that thing, and we had all these people show up on Friday night,
It's not SPHI, is it?
It's called the Health Extension Salon or something like that.
Okay.
No, something different, I think. And I'm not even sure if it's still going on or not, but at the time it was a very active group, and there were all kinds of delays, and it was getting late, and it was getting to be like 8 o'clock at night on Friday night, and these 50 or 60 people stuck it out, and they waited for me to actually talk. So I gave them the spiel, and one of the people in the audience happened to work at Stanford, and she invited me to come to Stanford and see if we could base the study there. So I talked to her advisor. This is Zenaida Good, who was a graduate student in immunology at the time. And I met with her advisor, Gary Nolan, and we hit it off quite well. And ultimately, we did base the trial at Stanford.
Great.
So the object of the trial was to use a combination of growth hormone and 2 things to mitigate this diabetogenic effect of growth hormone. One of those was DHEA, and one of those was metformin. Now, of course, at the time we did the study, nobody had ever tried anything like this before, so we didn't know how to do the study. We had to figure it out as we went along. And also we didn't know about safety issues. So growth hormone is a growth hormone. It makes cells divide. And dividing cells is not what you want to do or have if you have cancer, for example. So we were kind of scared to death that this might exacerbate prostate cancer in particular, because there's a correlation between people who have naturally high levels of IGF-1, which is made in response to growth hormone, and prostate cancer. So I was very intent on studying that, making sure we didn't get into trouble. What happened is that as we started the trial, I gave people growth hormone to begin with, and then DHEA to see if that would suppress the insulin effect, and then metformin on top of that. And my self trial back in circa 1995 to demonstrate the effect of DHEA was to give myself growth hormone for a week, after which my insulin level went up by 50%, and then maintain the same growth hormone dose for another week, but with DHEA. And my insulin level went back down exactly to where it had started.
Wow.
It was fantastic.
So you had the numbers from your own...
Yes, from my own self-experiments.
Yeah.
And I'd done this several times over time, and it always worked. So we learned all of this, and it turned out, so we were monitoring the prostate cancer risk using a common test that most people have heard of called the PSA, prostate-specific antigen test. And it's not perfect, and it has its ifs, ands, or buts, but if the PSA level goes up, you know to be concerned. So, and then there's another component of that. So if there's bound PSA and there's free PSA. So the percent free PSA also affects your cancer risk. So we looked at both of those things, and what we found is that based on those endpoints, after 15 days of treatment, the guys on the trial had a reduction in their prostate cancer risk.
Wow.
Just about 30%, something like 30% reduction in cancer risk.
That's great.
And that persisted for the rest of the year of treatment.
So instead of going up 50%, it went down.
Well, so the 50%, that's insulin.
Oh, that's insulin.
That's insulin, right, exactly. But the PSA, I was afraid that might go up. That actually went down.
Okay.
And the percent free went up, so the combination of the two was all moving in the right direction. So insulin did go up in our trial, and we were able to largely suppress that. We weren't able to totally suppress it, and I have ideas for doing better in the future, but we did a lot better than we would have done if we had not used those interventions to suppress insulin. So those were sort of safety issues that we were interested in. We are also interested in this other problem of inflammaging. That's an increase in generalized inflammation that takes place with aging, and I had spoken to an aging researcher, a well-known immunologist, before doing the trial, and she suggested that maybe regenerating the thymus was a bad idea because of this inflammaging problem. So the immune system is already too active in a sense because it's attacking things it shouldn't attack. It's creating this inflammatory response it shouldn't be doing. And so if you exacerbate that by improving, or let's say augmenting immune function, you might get into trouble. But I had a theory that actually inflammaging might be related to things like the thymus losing its sense of identity. So one of the things the thymus does is it manufactures these immune cells, which are called T cells because they're made in the thymus, they're trained by the thymus. And those T cells have two jobs actually. One of them is to kill things that want to kill you, and the second is to not kill you.
Which is the autoimmune part.
Yes, that's right. And if they stop losing their sense of self, then you start attacking yourself and having autoimmune disorders, right?
Which is why you have inflammation for 10 years in tissues because of this, because your body's attacking yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And actually, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It's caused by a kid getting a virus, and then the immune system clears the virus. But the antigen in the virus looks too much like part of the insulin machinery. And so the cells that are, the immune system that accidentally attacks those natural cells and wipes out your ability to make insulin. So that's a nasty disease. And so I thought that maybe part of the reason that we have inflammaging is that the body, since the thymus trains the T cells to recognize foreign invaders and also trains them essentially not to recognize yourself as self, if that second function declines with aging, then there should be problems developing. And if we improved self-recognition, inflammation should go down.
Ah, brilliant.
And it did.
That's amazing.
It went down.
Wow.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so insulin didn't go up as much as you thought.
Yes.
Inflammation went down.
Yes.
PSA levels that correspond to cancer in the prostate also stayed down.
Yes, or at least cancer risk.
Pre-cancer,
right.
Pre-cancer. What about the aging in particular?
Yes. Okay. So let me just, before I answer that question, let me just comment on one other thing. So of course our objective was to regrow the thymus. And as I said, as the thymus deteriorates and you run out of these T cells, you lose your ability to recognize antigens by about 98% or something like that. So we wanted to stop that. So we wanted to develop evidence that we could repair the immune system. So we did see the production of new T cells. They're called naive T cells, which is what you miss the most as you get older. They were coming back, and there's a special class called recent thymic emigrants, and they were coming back. We also saw that antigens that prevent you from attacking cancer went down. So they're called checkpoints. So they prevent the immune system from getting out of control, but they also prevent the immune system from killing cancer. And they tend to go up with aging, and so we brought them back down. That's big in and of itself.
And you're just winning
yes.
all over the board.
Right. And we also found an improvement in something called the lymphocyte to monocyte ratio. Now, if the lymphocyte to monocyte ratio is high, then you're protected against at least 19 different kinds of cancer and heart disease, stroke, and various other life-threatening conditions that are prevalent in aging that tend to go up in aging. And we actually raised our lymphocyte to monocyte ratio up. So a good lymphocyte to monocyte ratio for avoiding heart disease would be 5. And all of our guys were below 5 at the beginning of the trial, and they were around 8 at the end of the trial. So, so all these are immune system changes, which is what we were looking for. We got these very exciting positive changes. But what we weren't really expecting is almost too good to be true.
Okay.
It's the real reason that we're sitting here having this interview, I think. And that is that it looked like we were able to reverse aging in general. Now, of course, I have to qualify that statement. What do I mean by that? We don't quite have the right language to describe all this stuff yet, so I used a shorthand. So what I'm talking about is, in order to know whether you've affected aging or not, you have to be able to measure it. This has been a real problem for a long time. NIH had a big program to figure out how to get aging measured correctly, and they eventually gave up on it. But one genius in UCLA came up with the answer. There are other answers too, but this is the best answer at the time, and perhaps even still down to the present time. And that guy at the UCLA is named Steve Horvath, and he came up with this concept in this demonstration called the epigenetic clock. And it turns out that as we grow from being a fertilized egg cell to a baby, to an infant, to an adult, to an old person, our use of our genetic heritage changes. So you need different genes to grow to an infant than you need to grow into an older person. And there are indirect ways of sort of tracing the global changes that are happening in these gene usage patterns or gene expression patterns. And one simple way of doing that is measuring these little decorations on DNA called methyl groups. So Dr. Horvath came up with the epigenetic methylation clock of age, and he was able to tell you how old you are within 2 or 3 years just by taking a blood sample without knowing your age at all.
It's amazing.
Well, what's even more amazing is that if he told you that your age is your biological age, your epigenetic age is older than your chronological age, and you check yourself up, your health-wise and all this stuff, you do various tests, you realize you probably are actually biologically older than you should be. By the same token, if Dr. Horvath says you're younger than you should be, based on your age, your chronological age, you probably are. So it's a more profound thing than just being able to correlate something with aging. You're starting to get into something that's measuring aging itself, right? It's not just a correlate of your chronological age. It's actually a measure of how well you're doing biologically in terms of how well you're aging. So we were able to convince Dr. Horvath to collaborate with us. And we sent him blood samples from our trial guys before and after various periods of the trial. And he was floored by what he saw. Because as you can imagine, Dr. Horvath, having solved this problem, and by the way, just to put this in perspective, if you want to have an intervention against aging, you have to know whether it worked or not. How do you know? You have to have a way of measuring it, right? And so gerontologists have been longing for this for decades. And now that Horvath came up with this, he receives samples from everybody on the planet all the time. I mean, he studied everything you can think of, and he can actually find correlations between epigenetic age and whether you smoke or not.
Well,
You know, it's a very, very small effect,
sure.
but, you know, like maybe 0.05 years or something.
Right.
But he can pick it up. You know, it's that sensitive if you have a big enough
Wow.
group of people, right?
Mhm.
So he's been looking at all this stuff all the time, and people have had ideas that this might slow aging or that, and nothing ever did much of anything. Maybe slowed it a little bit here and there, but nothing had ever reversed it. So when he got the first result back, he was kind of floored because our guys at the end of the trial were 1.5 years younger epigenetically than they were at the time they started the trial.
And how long did the trial last?
The trial lasted a year, so compared to not being treated, they were 2.5 years younger than doing nothing.
Wow.
So essentially the way to look at it is that our treatment reversed, first of all, the year that they spent on the trial, and then on top of that, rolled them back another 1.5 years.
Mm.
So this seemed too good to be true, and we didn't want to be fooled. So Steve ran 3 other epigenetic aging clocks. And these clocks don't measure exactly the same thing. They correlate differently with blood cells and things like that. And sometimes they disagree with each other. But in our case, they're all agreed.
There's no doubt.
So there's no doubt. And in the probabilities that you can calculate that this is not true are so low that, you know, it's just proven over and over and over again. And another really interesting feature of this was that if you look at the rate at which aging was reversed, at least epigenetic aging was reversed, the rate was about 1.5 years per year for the first 9 months of the trial, and it was about 6.5 years for the last 3 months of the trial, years per year. So there was a huge acceleration in the rate of aging reversal in the last 3 months of the trial, which makes me wonder what would have happened if we had kept it going another 3 months.
Because you didn't know that before.
We had no idea.
Right.
We had no
So
idea.
now the new trial that you're going to run is going to go beyond the 1 year.
Well, we're going to look at people. One thing I learned from the TRIM trial is everybody's an individual. Everybody had to be optimized differently, and everybody responded in their own unique way. But everybody had this aging reversal effect, and I think everybody or most people had these other immune system improvements as well. So I will carefully monitor everybody, and if I think you're doing well at the end of this first 12 months, then I'll invite the trial participants to stay on the program. We're going to be looking at some new populations this time, so it's not totally predictable how they will respond. We hope to look at older people than we did before. Before, we looked at guys who were slated to be between 50 and 65 years of age. Happened that our youngest guy was 51, but in that age range. So we want to look at older people. We also want to look at younger people. We also want to look at women. And we also want to be able to accept people who are not in perfect health. And the guys in our trial were in nominally pretty good shape when they entered the trial, and not everybody's in that category. So there's going to be less certainty going forward than if we were just replicating the trial and not just expanding it into these other groups too. So I'm going to play it safe. First, do no harm. But yeah, if people seem to be doing well, I'll invite them to stick with it an extra 3 months, and if that looks good, then maybe an extra 3 months on top of that.
That's great.
Yeah, and then who knows what that will do.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this point, but you can't understate this. This is the first trial that has successfully reversed aging in humans. This is a huge deal because we are talking about the age reversal escape velocity and when we're going to get there, but we've had no indications materially that that's happening.
Exactly.
This is the first one.
Exactly.
So congratulations. We thought this was going to happen in this decade.
Yeah,
but
or maybe 20 years from now.
Yeah, right. But you got it in 2019, so you don't have to go to the 20s, right?
We actually accomplished it by 2017, but it took me 2 years to analyze all the data.
Is that right?
Right.
Okay, got it. How did you get Dr. Harbath on? He's a busy guy, isn't he?
We kind of fooled him into doing it. So my business partner, Bobby Brook, created this fictitious organization called Renaissance Bio, which actually is now doing some other things, so it's less fictitious than it was then. But its main purpose was to invite Steve Horvath to give a seminar before it at UCLA so we could introduce ourselves to him. So, so we did that 2 years, and on the second year, he finally knew who we were, and we told him about the trial, and he said he would jump in and help us.
That is amazing.
And I have to say, Steve is not only a great scientist, but a wonderful man and person. And he donated his time on this. He analyzed the epigenetic trial data for us free of charge, which was a good thing because we had no money.
Well, hopefully around 2 you have enough money and then some.
Well, we will see. We will see. We're still in the process of answering that question.
So let me ask you this, Dr. Fahy. You obviously expected some kind of result, which is why you did the trial. But how surprised were you when the results came back and it showed a 2.5 years decline?
I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. I wasn't shocked because I had an inkling that something like this might be possible. And this is based on, again, studies that nobody read or remembers or cared about at the time. A bunch of obscure Italian immunologists had been doing thymus transplants in mice ages and ages ago. And they found that the thymus would involute after about a month. So it would only restore immune system function temporarily because, it's programmed not to be there in old age and it's in the wrong environment. But it still did something, immunologically and in other ways. So there's like 5 different papers that were measuring different things. So in your brain, you have molecules that help your brain cells talk to each other called beta receptors. And typically in aging, most things don't change that much, although it seems like it does. But regulatory things like communication between cells, that tends to change a lot. And so these beta receptors in your brain, at least if you're a mouse, go down a lot with aging. But with a thymus transplant, they went back up to youthful levels. So why is the thymus rejuvenating your brain? That's kind of weird.
Right.
But then in the liver of the mice, this other weird thing happens. The liver acts like its cells want to divide, so it duplicates the DNA. And normally the cell would then divide, so each cell has the right amount of DNA, but the cells don't divide. And so the cells have twice as much DNA as they should. Wow. And if you give a thymus transplant to these animals, their liver cells divide, and now they have the right amount of DNA per cell. What has that got to do with the immune system?
Right.
Well, it's got something to do with it, but it wasn't obvious.
Got it.
It turns out that animals tend to be hypothyroid, and that's corrected by a thymus transplant. They tend to have high levels of insulin, and that's corrected by a thymus transplant. And there are other things that happen as well that are corrected by a thymus transplant. So that gave me an idea that the thymus may actually be a pacemaker of aging in general, not just the master gland of the immune system.
Interesting.
And so I figured if we could regrow the thymus, we might see some more generalized rejuvenation effects.
Very interesting. So kind of maybe not the master clock, but one of the clocks of aging.
Yes.
It's regulating.
It may be a very important clock of aging.
Yeah.
There are other clocks, there are the senescence clock and things like that, but this may be one of the central ones.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you read all these papers. Of course, they were done on rats. You did a little bit of experimentation on you in 1996.
Right.
How many times did you do this experiment on yourself before you launched this trial?
I only checked my thymus that one time, but I did other things. I looked at the response to growth hormone in terms of IGF-1 response and controlling insulin. I did that several times, but there's a limit on what I could do. I didn't have a lab that could measure immune system function or anything like that. So we just had to do this trial and find out, and so we did.
Okay, great.
Unfortunately, obesity tends to be associated with insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is going to make our work harder in reversing aging, perhaps, because I think insulin is a driver of aging. But short of being obese versus skinny, you have this other ancient phenomenon in gerontology called calorie restriction. So people have known since Clive McKay in 1935 that if you restrict the number of calories you feed an animal, it lives longer. Its aging process is slowed down. And so a lot of people are enthusiasts for calorie restriction, CR. And generally speaking, that's good idea and probably is a smart thing to do. But if you're on calorie restriction, you're not going to be growing very much, right?
Right.
And growth hormone is, geared to growing. It's renewing your cells. So if you're on CR, you're tending to tear things down, and then when you eat, you build them back up again. But you're not geared toward building them back up like you are when you're on growth hormone. Growth hormone is an anabolic hormone. So there's a contradiction between being on calorie restriction and being on growth hormone. There's probably a contradiction between being on a ketogenic diet and being on growth hormone as well, which is less obvious because the whole point of the ketogenic diet is to reduce insulin. Yeah. But that doesn't seem to be a good mix either, because again, well, in fact, it's not totally clear why there's a problem. But one of the guys on the trial who didn't respond the way we wanted to was also on a ketogenic diet. And he was the guy who dropped out, and he refused to change his diet. So
hardcore ketogenic
exactly,
diet.
Exactly.
So let me ask you this, Dr. Fahy.
Yes.
Let's assume that this second phase of this trial works splendidly.
Yes.
Right, as you expect.
Yes.
What do you see the future? Because we've got these anabolic plus reducing the diabetic effects with your protocol.
Yes.
We've got calorie restriction. We've got fasting. We've got senolytics.
Yes.
We're in the anti-aging interventions.
Yes.
Would somebody do this protocol for how long? And then how would this be administered to them?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So there is a broader context, of course. You need your thymus to stay alive. Even if all of the other aging interventions work perfectly and abolish aging in every other way, if they don't take care of immune system aging, you're going to die. Sure. I mean, it's just simple. So these things need to work together. At the same token, regrowing your thymus isn't going to do anything for your telomeres. Our telomere lengths were not improved. They were not increased by our treatment. So you need all of these things working together. And so in terms of how this would all sort of deploy, as far as the thymus regeneration aspect of that is concerned, we don't have all the answers. But first of course, whatever age you are, you should try to get treated because wherever you are, hopefully there can be some improvement. And maybe you don't improve very much if you're 90, or maybe beyond the age of 85, you have no thymus and we can't regrow it. Who knows? But it's a first approximation. If you can do something, you should. But then in terms of what the optimum is going to turn out to be, it's hard to say. My intuition at this point is that the optimum age for thymus regeneration is probably between the ages of 45 and 50, which is just coincidentally when I tried it on myself.
Okay.
Yes. But so I would imagine that you go in at, say, 45, you regrow your thymus, and then maybe come back at 50 or 55, do it again, and then come back and maybe at 65, do it again. And every time you regrow your thymus, your T cells that you're making on that round may last for decades. So you don't have to keep stimulating your body with growth hormone all the time. You just have to do it long enough to regrow your thymus, repopulate your immune system for another 10 years or whatever, and then go back and do it again.
Right, so this fits in perfectly in that you can go anabolic for a little while.
Yes.
And then you go catabolic, go back to the symphony. The symphony goes back to normal, right?
Yes. You don't have to give up any options. Right. You just have to intersperse them together, right? You do one, and then you stop that and do the other, and then you stop that. So you go back and forth. And
the biohacker in me now is wondering right now, is how could I use that protocol and add testosterone to get ripped, to get a six-pack abs during the time you're doing this, and then get off all that and just maintain for the next 10 years. So I look like Dr. Life when I'm 90.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, he used growth hormone to do that, I believe, and that is how Centogenics used to do it also before they got into trouble for that and had to back off. Okay. So even if I had an answer for you on that, I'd be forbidden to tell you what it was because I wanted to do this in a way the FDA is going to like, right? And the FDA does not approve getting ripped. Not being ripped is not a disease, although you could define it that way, but the FDA is not going to buy that. Right. But once we're on the market with this combination that will reverse aging, that would also help in other ways, and you can benefit from those other ways, right?
And maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, but how do you see this being administered to people? Would that be a topical? Would that be
Yes.
an injection? How would we do this, and how often?
Right. So we're going to be experimenting in the TRIM. So the original trial was called the TRIM trial. The new trial will be the extension of the TRIM trial, so we're calling it TRIM-X. And in TRIM-X, we're going to be experimenting with a new way of giving growth hormone, not orally and not by injection. So if you're a science fiction fan, enough to remember the original Star Trek series back in the 1960s, Bones McCoy, if he wanted to give you a shot, he wouldn't make you roll up your shirt sleeve and stick a needle in your arm. He would take this little thing and push it up against your arm, even through your shirt, and you'd hear a hissing sound, and the medication would be shot into your body that way, painlessly.
Gotcha.
That's how we're planning to do it.
Is that right?
Yes. So it's going to be an interesting approach.
Okay.
But ultimately, we may be able to find ways of making it even simpler than that. So we use growth hormone because it's foolproof. If you use, growth hormone is normally released from your pituitary gland, especially when you're young, but throughout your life. And there are certain mechanisms in that pituitary gland that you can goose up artificially with drugs to make your pituitary start releasing growth hormone again in aging. And it takes a while, and not everybody has the same response, so it's hard to control clinically, especially in a trial, when you have to know exactly what your treatment is. And if you take this hormone releasing factor, it may or may not be doing what you think it should be doing. But ultimately, we may get better at releasing it, so you can do it that way. And we will be eventually investigating that as well. We have some plans for that, for looking at that. Once we got to that point, then we can start thinking about a pill that you could take to reverse aging.
There we go.
Right.
That's what the fountain of youth in a pill.
Exactly.
Everybody wants that. They'll pay anything.
And like I say, everybody's an individual, so there's many different kinds of people, and there may be 20 different versions of the pill to match every case. But in principle, I can imagine us getting there. And then that would be it. Then you just go to your pharmacy, you get your anti-aging pill, and live happily ever after, literally.
Go to Walgreens every 3 months, get a pill, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
How far, again, we're talking Star Trek right now, so how far in the physical universe do you think we are from that point?
Oh, not that far.
Are we talking 5 years? Are we talking 25?
Well, so there's two levels of answer to your question. One is what you can do, and the other is what you're allowed to do, right? So scientifically and medically, you may be able to accomplish certain things, but not be able to provide that to people and benefit people because you still have the regulatory issues to go through. So I don't know exactly how to predict how long it will take to get FDA approval, but I wouldn't be surprised if we could accomplish something along those lines in 5 years. So the beauty of,
5 years?
Yeah, and you think about it, anybody else, you're talking about 10, 20 years, and then somewhere along the line, there's always this valley of death, right? You do everything right, you invest all your money, you blow all these years of effort, and then somebody dies, and you realize that there's a side effect you hadn't thought of because this new drug that you're developing had never been tested on more than 100 people before. You put it in the general population, you find it kills off all redheaded females over 45. Or something screwy like that, right? And so, and then maybe the scare from that, makes the stockholders revolt and your company dies and it's lost. But we're not in that situation. Everything that we are doing is vanilla. The FDA is not worried about growth hormone the way we're using it. It's not worried about DHEA. That's an over-the-counter thing. It's not worried about metformin. Metformin is used by all kinds of people, and it has a great safety record. So all we have to do is show that our treatment improves some indication, some health indication that the FDA will recognize as valid. So one of the things, for example, that we discovered in our trial is that after about 9 months to a year on our treatment, kidney function was better than at the beginning of the trial. So the kidneys filter your bloodstream to make urine, and the filtration rate was actually up. And even 6 months after the end of the trial, we actually revisited 6 of our original 9 guys and measured their kidney function. It was continuing to go up.
Whoa.
Continuing to improve 6 months after the trial.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, the aging reversal effect also persisted 6 months after the trial. There was no reduction in that by 2 out of the 4 measures, and only partial reduction in the other 2. So that was good. Yeah.
Very cool. So Dr. Fahy, when is this version 2 of your trial starting up?
Well, we're hoping that we'll start next month. We had been hoping it would start a lot sooner than this, but we've had to do a lot of fundraising, and that's taken more time than we expected. We've had to work through a lot of scheduling issues that we didn't have with the original trial structure. But yeah, we hope to start in April or so.
Okay, April. Great. Are you still looking for more funds?
Yes. So it turns out that just reversing aging is not very attractive from an investment point of view. You wouldn't think that.
No.
You'd think that that would be the most hot investment opportunity on the planet, right? But the problem is we don't have one of these weird new drugs that nobody else has ever seen before that might fail. We only have something that's almost guaranteed to work. So that's just no good.
Silicon Valley wants a new molecule.
Yeah, it wants a new molecule because you can own it and you can have a monopoly on it, and then you can charge whatever you want and not have any competition.
Yeah.
Whereas in our case, the fear is that people will just rip us off. They'll just use growth hormone, DHEA, and metformin, even though they really don't know how to do that in the way that we've worked out. And we're going to be developing tremendously more insight into how to do this with all these new populations that we're going to be looking at in the TRIM-X trial. But there's another couple of dimensions to that also, which is that even if you did know how to do all of the dose adjustments in the correct way, it's actually a very labor-intensive process to do that. You have to factor in multiple personal characteristics of each individual that you're optimizing. And that just burns up more time than your average doctor wants to invest. And so we are going to be developing some computer programs to work on that. And we're going to be developing data processing methods that make it easier to feed the data into those algorithms. And then we're going to hope to franchise that out or license that out to other doctors so we can partner with other doctors and let them do it right rather than just running off on their own and not doing it right, probably. So we think that that's a recipe for making money. We also have some opportunities to convert what we're doing into a telemedicine business, which could reach vast numbers of people. So that's another way that we can make money. So ultimately, I think that anyone who invests in this will do well, but it's a different kind of investment concept than most people have. So, you know, this building that we're sitting in right now is funded by profits from selling vitamins. And the vitamin company doesn't have a patent on any of the vitamins, but it makes tens and hundreds of millions of dollars every year because it does the best job. And so you don't necessarily have to have patentable technology, although we do have a patent in process and we think it's a valid patent. We hope to get it, but even if not, just being on the cutting edge, innovating in a way nobody else does, pushing the frontier, and having the tools necessary to scale it up, that's what's going to give us our market edge and our profit margin. So I think eventually somebody will understand that we are a worthwhile investment. We are going to be also raising money through government grants, which we don't have to give up any stock for, which is nice. And so far, the National Institute on Aging has been pretty interested in what we have told them we would like to propose to do. So that may bring in some money as well.
That's great.
Yes.
I'm actually part of the BLSA longitudinal study in
Netherlands,
which is part of the NIA.
Yes.
Well, I hope they incorporate this so I get all of these for free.
You're in the Baltimore longitudinal study?
I am.
Holy cow.
I know. I heard of it last year and I promptly called them.
Wow.
And they accepted me, and so
fantastic. You live in Baltimore?
No, I live in Los Angeles.
That's interesting. I didn't know that they had disseminated. It makes sense that they would. Why not?
Yeah.
Oh God, that's been going on forever.
I know, it's a 70-year-old trial.
It's a fantastic thing. Yeah,
So,
Nathan Shock. Yeah.
So I'm part of it, and they have all my data. They won't give it to me.
Yeah. Oh well.
They tell me if anything's wrong.
Yes.
They're gonna call my doctor. But other than that, most of my data is in their hands.
Well, you look very healthy. I don't think anything's going to go wrong for a while.
Well, thank you very much. So do you.
Thank you.
I've got one more question for you.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we know this is coming. This is very exciting, and I can't wait for it personally. But what can people that are starting to worry about aging?
Yes.
You said that 45 may be a good age for the first intervention, right?
Yes.
But if you're in your 30s, 40s, or even 50s, what can you start to do now to slow down your rate of aging? It doesn't have to be the DHEA or Metformin.
Right.
Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I do all kinds of stuff. I take huge numbers of pills every morning.
150?
Oh, maybe not 150, but I haven't counted them up, but it's a lot. How many do you take?
I take about 30.
Yeah. Well, I may even take more than that. But
Okay.
So one of the things I just sort of think I've discovered, I'm not sure it's really a discovery, but it's an observation, is carnosine.
Mm-hmm.
So my muscles are pretty good, and I'm 70 almost. And
you look good.
Thanks. And your muscles are supposed to deteriorate with aging, and mine don't seem to be doing that. And I attribute that to taking a lot of carnosine every day. Mm-hmm. Carnosine reverses cell senescence in a dish. Yeah. If you have cells growing and looking horrible, and you dunk a lot of carnosine in there, it just reverses the senescent phenotype. So it might do that for muscle satellite stem cells, and that would be nice. So that's one thing. But take your vitamins. Make sure that you're not deficient in things like magnesium, which often happens with aging. One of the things we did in our trial is we had people take vitamin D, just a general anti-cancer nutrient. It helps prevent cancer. Don't get calcium deficient, for women, looking at osteoporosis. But these are all things that everybody knows. There are other things that out there that are a bit more adventurous. One of the things that I take every day is centrophenoxine. Centrophenoxine is a drug that was introduced ages and ages ago that's usually ignored.
You seem to love stuff that's been ignored.
Yeah, well, I've been around a long time, and I would go to these meetings and see this incredible observation made, and then you never hear about it again. For decades, and it's amazing. So
what does it do?
So centrophenoxine, it was discovered because, as you may know, you've heard of Aubrey de Grey somewhere, I'm sure.
Very well.
Aubrey has 7 deadly sins of aging, and one of those is accumulation of intracellular junk. Mm-hmm. And the one that he initially was focusing on is lipofuscin, which can occupy something like 70% of the volume of a heart cell or a brain cell in certain cases.
Wow.
Nobody's ever shown that is actually harmful, but it's certainly nothing that you would prefer to happen. It doesn't seem to serve any good function. So Kalidas Nandi discovered that if he fed animals centrophenoxine, the lipofuscin accumulation rate in the brain would slow down. And then later on, he actually was able to show that the lipofuscin content of the brain would actually decrease. So you can actually reverse lipofuscin accumulation. Mm-hmm. But that's not the only reason to be interested in it. So according to George Webster, protein synthesis tends to go down with age in a very suspicious way. Like it's fine, and then it falls off a cliff, and then it's the same. Sort of like the immune system falling off the cliff, as though something is driving that. And so he was looking at ways of restoring that. And if you expose biological extracts to centrophenoxine in a test tube, you can reverse the age-related decline in protein synthesis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's amazing. So who knows if that's happening, but it may be that lipofuscin is a result of inadequate proteolysis, and that by improving protein synthesis, then you also improve protein turnover, and you get rid of some of this crap. Even though it's mostly lipoidal in nature, you're just generally turning over lipid, would be one guess. So that's one drug. Used to be the 5th most popular drug in France. It was used to resuscitate people after anesthesia. When I started taking it, it gave me vivid Technicolor dreams. So I started taking it in the morning instead so I could sleep better.
So you didn't wake up sweating?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Another drug is Deprenyl or selegiline. Selegiline extends the lifespan of 5 different mammalian species, including dogs. And according to papers, which I have not read, but I've read the titles to them, it reverses fine structural changes in the brain that take place with aging. Your brain actually deteriorates on an electron microscopic level, and you can show that that's at least partly reversed by Deprenyl.
Wow.
So there's things out there to find. NAD, NAD is the cat's meow, right? If NAD goes down, you're old. If NAD comes up, you're young. At least if you're a rat or a mouse. So we can take things like nicotinamide riboside. We can take nicotinamide mononucleotide. And possibly other precursors to hopefully boost our NAD levels up. There's still a lot of frontier aspects to that intervention because it's hard to measure NAD, and you can't just go down to your local blood draw place and measure your NAD levels. I've actually been working on that problem along with others. But you can take the precursors, and if you take enough precursor and you're a mouse, then your aging is reversed in several different ways. Unfortunately, in humans, it would be the equivalent of 60 grams of the precursor, right?
Wow.
So who knows what we're doing? But at least it's been shown that if you take nicotinamide riboside, you can increase your blood levels of NAD, and so hopefully you're doing yourself some good with that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff out there. I guess the general advice would be keep your eyes open, pay attention to what's going on, look at websites that have blogs and stuff like that, and you'll discover all kinds of wonderful things out there.
Wonderful, Dr. Fahy. This is so good. How can people find you online?
I can be reached at GFahy, that's G, F as in Fred, AHY. You don't pronounce the H, but it's in there, at interveneimmune.com. INTERVENE, immune.com, because we're intervening in immune system aging.
That is a great name.
Thank you.
I am going to link your information in the podcast show notes so people that want to find you, or at least hopefully want to donate,
yes,
can
that would
find
be wonderful.
you and shoot you a note.
And believe me, people donated to us in trim, and it largely saved our life.
Really?
Because we were so short on funding in trim.
Oh my goodness.
We did amazing things with very little money, but we had some help from some very nice people, so we appreciate that very much.
That's great, and I'm happy to help spread the message.
Thank you.
Dr. Fahy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Faraz. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, and more power to you too.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.